The Toronto Maple Leafs have signed Auston Matthews, but can they keep their core four together after this year? Plus, we have our women's hockey spotlight. And is the NHL going back to international play? All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can hear us now on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Happy Friday, Rachel.
Happy Friday. It's a little gloomy, rainy where I am, but a good Friday nonetheless.
Yeah, and hard to believe September is less than a week away. Training camp's, about 3 weeks away, give or take? The time for cottages and fishing and golf is starting to wind down as we get ready for training camps to open up across the league.
Yeah, and I think that the Auston Matthews deal got people out of their cabins and back on the beat.
Yeah, I think so too. And you know, one question that we haven't really discussed yet about the Matthews deal. Do you think he's still underpaid based on all of the money he's going to make and his talent?
Yeah, the guys talked about it on the Thursday show, and Jay suggested that he was still underpaid. And I think that there's an argument to be made there simply because he took that 4-year deal, right? That if that cap hit for him and that salary was truly what he was worth, he would have signed the 8-year deal, in my opinion. And if so, he thinks he can get more. He thinks he is worth more. I think there's an argument to be made that, yes, he is based on his production. It's hard to disagree with that.
I think so too. But at the same time, even with this contract, and this is what we really wanted to focus on, how can the Toronto Maple Leafs keep their big four players together after this season? Because they are entering one heck of a cap crunch by the end of this season.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest question, because they do have a number of guys who will be on expiring contracts this upcoming season. And now that Auston Matthews is locked up for the next 4 years until he's 30, they still have an extra year left with Tavares and Marner. So really, I think at least on the forward side, you're looking at almost a battle between William Nylander and Tyler Bertuzzi to see which one they're going to want to keep around. Their pay scale is pretty similar. They both have no trade clauses this year. So trading either one of them at deadline is going to be a challenge. But if they can convince one of them at that point, based on their production and based on the cost benefit that the Leafs, do analytically of, what they're going to pay them versus what their production would be. If they can convince the other one to allow them to trade him, for greener pastures for them, that they're no longer part of the Leafs plan moving forward. That's one possibility. But then, of course, there's a possibility they're making a cup run, right? And they want to keep them both.
Yeah, and that is sort of the risk, because the one they would lose, let's say, if they're only going to sign one of them, they would lose for nothing, as opposed to being able to get either picks, a prospect, or a player at the trade deadline. But if you're all in, and we all know the Toronto Maple Leafs have not even made the Stanley Cup final since 1967. the last year of the original 6. If they're all in to try to end that, it may be the right move for them to hold on to both players for this year and take that chance to try to make that run in the Eastern Conference, which still appears to be pretty wide open, at least as of now.
Right. And like, I do not envy those decision makers because I mean, anything can happen with this team, as we've seen time and time again. But it does seem like the pieces are still there to make the run. They just have to, get over themselves in the playoffs to a large degree. And, obviously, I mean, maybe not obviously, but to me, obviously, Boston isn't going to be who they were this year during the regular season, at least. So I think there's going to be an opportunity for the Leafs in that division to gain some more points and to have themselves be in a better position going into the playoffs next year, in theory, based on what we know now. And so I think that there may be that incentive to keep the team together.
Very well could be. And I think that's priority one in Toronto. Now, if you could only keep one of them between William Nylander and Tyler Bertuzzi, considering what they probably will cost to keep, who are you keeping? How long are you looking to sign them for? I mean, what's your strategy?
I mean, it feels like, I don't know, man. That honestly, I just don't know. It feels like Nylander wants to stay, but there's a question if the Leafs are, devoted to him or interested in that. I think it obviously not in the way that there was for Matthews. Like, that's a no-brainer. But even like Marner, I feel like there's more of a commitment to Marner when his deal was made than it feels like, where they're at with Nylander. So, and then Bertuzzi is just coming in here like hungry to make an impact and, get those sweet Maple Leafs dollars and playing for this marquee franchise. Like, I just think all bets are off at this point.
Yeah, and I think it almost goes without saying that Nylander could probably get more money. If money is the only consideration, he could probably get more money on the open market than he's going to get from Toronto, and maybe for Bertuzzi as well. But if money is the main consideration, hitting the free agent market would make more sense for Nylander. But just Wednesday, he said in an interview he wants to stay in Toronto long term. He can't imagine himself playing with any other team. Maybe the truth, but not the greatest negotiating stance, certainly for William Nylander. I don't know.
Yeah, and you have to also consider that the Leafs are going to have to sign like 3 or 4 defensemen and figure out their goalie situation all in this cap, which, now Auston Matthews will have eaten up a bit of that increase, at least half of the potential increase. Signing like potentially up to 7 more players in the remaining cap. I mean, something's got to give here.
Yeah, something's got to give here, and it sort of reinforces also, I think, that this upcoming season, 2023-2024, is the Maple Leafs putting all their chips into the middle of the poker table and saying, I'm in, because I don't think they can keep all of this team at this level beyond this season unless they've got some young players who are about to really break out and play on the last year or two of an entry-level contract.
Yeah, I think honestly that's what it's going to have to look like for them moving forward, which, is a tall order for some of these young kids.
No question about that. Well, we have got a lot more to get to on today's show. We will have Erica Ayala with our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight coming up next.
Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. Take some time to visit FanDuel and include money lines, props, and more all around your team. Go Birds.
And now we go to Erica Ayala for our bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight.
Hey, women's hockey fans. Welcome to the Women's Hockey Spotlight on Locked On NHL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Erica L. Ayala, bringing you the Women's Hockey Spotlight, but also your host of Locked On Kraken. So this Women's Hockey Spotlight, we have a few things to talk about, including an overlap with women's hockey and the National Hockey League, as well as Team China advancing in IIHF standings. Let's start first with the NHL crossover. The first one actually I want to talk about is something that has not officially been reported, but happened right after our last Women's Hockey Spotlight. We've been talking about the new Women's Hockey League. Doesn't have an official name yet, but many people are calling it the Professional Women's Hockey League, or the PWHL. And former Pittsburgh Penguins executive Brian Burke has been attached to this new league. Now, I, of course, know Brian Burke as an NHL executive, but also as I started getting more involved with the NHL and You Can Play, that's when I started learning more about Brian and the Burke family when it comes to hockey and the LGBTQ plus community. But honestly, that's really all, at least from a women's hockey perspective, that we know about Brian Burke. I also have heard that he's been very supportive of the PWHPA in the past. So since there is a lot of carryover from the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association in what will be the new league, it's not completely surprising. And Brian Burke is no longer with the Penguins. So what that will mean as far as how he's able to impact strategy specifically for women's hockey, yet to be seen. But I think we can all agree that Brian Burke, at minimum, has connections in hockey, particularly through the National Hockey League. So I guess we'll just have to wait for the official announcement and see how everything transpires. The second one, and shout out to the New York Post, but I actually read this in the Ice Garden, the New York Rangers, the Blue Shirts, have hired Hockey Hall of Famer Angela Ruggiero. Now, Angela is just about as decorated as they come, including playing for the Tulsa Oilers in where I now call home, Tulsa, Oklahoma. But Angela Ruggiero went to Harvard. She then went to Harvard Business School, but was also an Olympian and a pioneer for the women's program on the U.S. national team. The defender has pioneered also in sports business with Sports Innovation Lab, and her Fluid Fan project has been groundbreaking for a lot of people looking to tap into women's sports. Now, her move to the New York Rangers is said to be in a hockey operations, as a hockey operations advisor. Now, Angela has been operating Sports Innovation Lab and has been working out of Boston, as far as I know, and obviously the Rangers are in New York. So since this is an advisory role, I'm very curious to see how much involvement and, quite honestly, how many or how much time Angela will spend in New York, or will she be able to operate from home? But as far as a player, a few things you should know about her. I already mentioned Hockey Hall of Famer. She has been listed as one of the top defenders ever in the U.S. program. She had skated for 14 seasons in 71 games, competed in 10 world championships and 4 Olympic Games for the United States. Also, again, executive at the international level, has worked with the International Ice Hockey Federation, bringing the Olympics to Los Angeles. She has been on the board for the Boston Athletic Association. And if you listen to Locked On Kraken, you know that I got to rub elbows with Angela Ruggiero as she was a business leader at the WNBA All-Star Weekend and has been to a lot of other women's sporting events over time. So Angela Ruggiero knows hockey. Angela Ruggiero knows sports business. And so I'm very curious to see how this plays out. Finally, I want to take you over to the hockey news. And if you've been following Ian Kennedy, then you know that he has been following the IIHF World Championships Division 1B. Now, every once in a while, particularly the lower divisions, will have tournaments to see if any teams will be relegated up, or I should say promoted up or relegated down. There are multiple different divisions. And this year, just this week, China earned a spot at the World Championships. Now, the World Championships field in women's hockey has recently been expanded, so there's more opportunity now for the 1B division, and other divisions to be promoted up. The great story about China, if you know women's hockey, then you know that the Chinese Federation invested a lot of money to have what they called sports ambassadors who were from around the globe, mostly North America and some European skaters, and they had them play with the Chinese national team. They even invested in, at the time, 2 teams, which then got absorbed into one, as part of the Canadian Women's Hockey League, or the CWHL. And that money that came into the CWHL from the Chinese Federation also helped the CWHL pay players for the first time. This is very exciting. And actually, Toronto's 6 PHF, Premier Hockey Federation, Isabel Cup champion Leah Lum scored the goal that got China into the top tier. They beat Austria 2-0, and they will be moved up and playing in the top division. Czechia is a team that has moved up. The United States is there, Canada, Finland, and it goes on. This is massive, and I think it also shows the investment over time that is placed in women's hockey will pay dividends. China knew they were going to have a team at the Beijing Olympics. I was able to be there. And if you want to hear more from Leah about the Olympic experience, make sure you head over to Black Rosie Media. Now, Leah and I did have this conversation literally a week before the acquisition of the Premier Hockey Federation, but I think you'll still find it enjoyable, especially what she has to say about playing for Beijing and going back to her ancestral roots in China. So more to come for the Women's Hockey Spotlight. And if you really like learning more about women's hockey, make sure you like these videos, comment. But if you just can't wait for us to bring you more coverage, check out Black Rosie Media. That's my platform. You can also check out the Ice Garden. I mentioned Ian Kennedy in the Hockey News. They have a women's section on their website and are growing in their women's hockey coverage. The Athletic also has Haley Salvian, who is the lone reporter that is solely hired by a mainstream media company to cover women's hockey. And we're hoping to have more. But that's all for this Women's Hockey Spotlight. My name again, Erica L. Ayala, your host of the Women's Hockey Spotlight and of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Let me send you back to Locked On NHL.
And thanks again to Erica Ayala for our bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight. Coming up next, we will talk about the NHL's goal to return to more international competition. We've got that and a lot more still to come on today's Locked On NHL podcast. So after a few years of sort of shying away from the Olympics and not being able to participate in the Olympics, it looks like the NHL is trying to ramp up its international footprint and its participation in international competitions. Rachel, what do you think about what the league is trying to do right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because we on this very show talked about the games in Australia that are coming up, and it's part of trying to get some further reach around the world to grow the game. And returning to the World Cup of Hockey, I think, does that as well. And it gets everybody involved all at once. The Olympics are every 4 years, but that's not really enough to whet the appetite. And of course, with the NHL sitting out the last couple Olympics, those men's competitions, I should say. The women's competitions did just fine and
Yes,
were
they did.
great hockey. The men's felt like, I think, second fiddle in a lot of ways, and they were, let's be clear on that point. But I think, there is a desire to get back to that, and I think it's a good thing. I know there's risk from a injury standpoint, but I still think it's a good thing. And I think seeing top NHLers in different combinations, and you get to see, people from the same country play together as opposed to on opposing club teams. And I love that, mixing up the rivalries.
Yeah, although it's a little tough on, like, for example, if you're an Islander fan and then you have, Ilya Sorokin playing against, Brock Nelson. And who are you rooting for if you're an Islander fan? Do you end up rooting for your country? Do you end up rooting for your team's players? Do you sort of feel mixed up about that? That's always sort of a challenge, I think, for a lot of hockey fans.
I don't know. I think it's kind of fun.
Oh, it's fun. It's just a challenge. I mean, it's a little confusing emotionally sometimes.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think that, especially if you talk to the European players, they want it because they enjoy playing for their country a lot. And, coming up in their systems, I think you're getting that more now in the last decade or so with the U.S. national team development program. I think has created something pretty special, and to not have something beyond that U20 squad to go to after that, I think is probably a little, disappointing for some of those guys who want to continue to play together at the senior level. And they just haven't been able to do that because of the lack of NHL participation. And I think the same goes for a lot of the Team Canada guys, that you just sort of get some minor leaguers and then guys who didn't make the playoffs playing for Team Canada and Men's Worlds. And like, it just doesn't feel like the top tier of what Canada can do. And I think, the Team Canada guys are itching to prove that they are the best in the world, right? And they haven't been able to do so.
Yeah, and I always like the international competitions, and the goal, just to spell it out, is to create an international event for February of 2025. So we're still another year and a half away right now. And then participate in the 2026 Olympics, which are going to be in Milan. And then there will be a World Cup of hockey played on even years in between Olympic Games. So that's what they're looking to do. According to Bill Daly, it's the 25 international tournament, the 26 Olympics, a 2028 World Cup of hockey, the 30 Olympics, a 30-32 World Cup of hockey, and so on. So I like it. I think these international competitions grow the game. They're good for the game. I like the different combinations of players, even if sometimes you have, two teams with your best players, two countries going against each other. I think this is a good idea, and I'm just disappointed that the NHL didn't do it sooner, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I went to the World Cup of Hockey the last time they had it up in Toronto, and those games that I went to, some of the most fun hockey that I've ever seen. That Team North America thing was wild, and I absolutely loved every minute of it. I don't know that they would do anything like that again. I think that was kind of a one-off situation with the league. But I do think that there's really impetus here to keep international play going. Bill Daly did hint that it wouldn't necessarily be entirely NHL players, that there would be opportunities for other players from those countries to make the team in this tournament, which I think is intriguing and, could open the door for some minor leaguers to make the squad as well. And, for some of the teams, but I love it. I think it mixes things up. It makes a fun break, honestly, in the middle of the season, especially if they're doing it around the official Olympic time. They could do it preseason like they did before in terms of the World Cup of Hockey thing. They would still have to obviously participate in the Olympics in February, but I love it. And obviously there's also more chance for merchandising and jersey sales and all of that. So I just don't see the downside here.
Other than potential player injuries, I agree with you. I don't see a downside. And then, Bleacher Report tried to project a Team USA for this tournament. And I guess we both had a problem with the players that they projected onto the team.
Yeah, I guess I don't have any problem with the players that they projected inherently. The problem is that we're talking 2025 here. And I think this roster reflects now. It does not reflect in 2025. So they've got their top line of the Kachucks with Auston Matthews, their second line, Jack Hughes centering Jason Robertson and Alex DeBrincat. They've got Jack Eichel as a 3C, which is wild, with Kyle Connor and Clayton Keller, Tage Thompson, Jake Gensel, and Cole Caulfield, or Quinn Hughes, Adam Fox, Jacob Slavin, Charlie McAvoy, Zach Werenski, and John Carlson. Then they've got Hellebuck, Ottinger, and Swayman as the goalies. I don't have a problem with the goalies here, but I just think, okay, 2 years from now, you're telling me that 0 of the guys drafted in the last 2 years have a chance to make this team. 0. Yeah, I just don't think that's possible. And I like, where's Logan Cooley in this conversation? I think he's got a shot. Where's Will Smith in this conversation? He's probably got a shot. If you look at this past year's U20 squad for World Juniors or the U18 squad at World Championships, like there's at least 5 or 6 guys that will have a chance. And I'm not saying like that all of them are going to make it, but at least 1 or 2 of them are going to be on this team, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Luke Hughes, I think, definitely would be in consideration by the time.
Yeah, I mean, we got 2 of the 3 Hugheses on this list, so maybe we're asking a little too much here. But I think Luke Hughes should be in that conversation, as part of those U.S. junior teams.
Yeah, I think so. And look, obviously that will evolve over the next year and a half when we get closer. And some players will be injured. Some players play between now and then will fall off and they would no longer be in consideration. And some guys will break out. So, the projection was great if the team was going to play next week. But, there's still a year and a half before this tournament allegedly takes place or hopefully takes place. So there's going to be some changes between now and then. And it'll certainly be interesting to see who emerges, who fades, and what. But I think the bottom line is, if you look at that team, the United States can put a pretty competitive team on the ice.
Yeah, I think, Team Canada is going to have something to say about it, as will, I think, the Swedes, the Czechs. I think, the wrinkle here is, can we project ahead and know what Russia will be doing then? And will Russia be allowed in international competition? Because to have this tournament without Ovi in it and without the Russian goaltenders, like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, that does take a lot away from the competition. And yet politically, I don't know whether or not we'll be able to work that out. But a little more intrigue added to the equation here for this potential World Cup or other international competition. And we'll see how it plays out. Well, that's going to do it for us today. I will be back on Monday talking to 3 of our local hosts about the biggest stories from around the league. Thanks again to everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. And again, we will follow. There is no offseason here on Locked On NHL. We will follow the biggest stories every Monday through Friday from around the league. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. And thanks for listening and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.